you say you're happy. Like there's something that happens, especially with biological females who transition, is you start getting testosterone. And one of the benefits of testosterone is increased mood. So when you start getting on testosterone, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. And that's like a chemical thing that you're on testosterone. Now you feel good. And that's that jump that when they do first transition, they feel really good. But then over time, yeah. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, educator, bringing common sense and critical thinking to issues within the culture wars. And the topic that I've covered more than any other on this Viewpoint Diversity podcast is the transgender issue. And the reason people are like, why are you always covering the transgender issue? Will, you're obsessed with this. We haven't sorted it out yet. People are digging their heels in. We're not getting to the truth. It's too emotionally triggering. It's too emotionally charged. And we need to get to how are we going to move forward with this next generation? Because you look at the data is very clear that more and more people are transitioning. New York Times just showed that 10% of the population is aligned with some sort of LGBTQ preference or identity. You look at like the hockey stick of young people who are becoming trans. And my guest today, it's her second time on the podcast. She has had a whole life of being a licensed clinical social worker. She's worked with youth. She's worked with foster care. She's been in the game of working with the most at risk and vulnerable populations of our youth for a very long time. But then she became vilified when she took this, certain stances against the COVID vaccine mandates and certain stances when it comes to transgender ideas. So Pamela Garfield-Jaeger, it's great to see you again. It's awesome to have you on. You have books that you're going to share. One of your books is A Practical Response to Gender Distress, Tips and Tools for Families. That's one for adults. But then you also are releasing, very soon coming up, a children's book for young children about the idea of identity and about affirming a child's identity. I've had several people on the podcast who were trans. I've had 9 different transgender people on the podcast. And now I've had 4 different detransitioners as well. Chris Beck, Chloe Cole, Calvin Lunt, and I just recently had Diego Arien, who all have different stories. But detransitioning is something I do want to get in with you about, because that seems to be something that I think we can all get on board with. That's a bad idea. The idea of detransitioning is something we want to avoid. And if people have gender dysphoria or people are trans and they're adults, they can live the way that they want to live. But the concept of detransitioning, especially when they've transitioned young, seems like something that should be avoided as much as we possibly can. So Pamela, it's great to see you. I'm excited to get into the stuff that you've been up to and get your take on some of the movement that we're seeing now. It's changed just since Trump's been in office a little bit more. He's saying like, we're only going to recognize male and female and getting women out of, or trans women, biological men out of women's sports and things along those lines. So thank you. I'm excited to jump in with you. How you been?
Oh, I've been great. I was just telling you right before, the last time we met or spoke, I was so nervous. I was so green. I think I said like 1,000 times. So
Yeah.
and I'm a little less nervous and more comfortable. And so I'm happy to have this conversation.
Yeah. So that was maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. Where do
Yeah.
you see the trajectory now? Do you see a shift in the culture where more and more people are kind of like waking up or seeing that there might be dangers to early transition of kids? Is that becoming more mainstream?
It's a major shift. I think the shift is that people are recognizing that it's happening at all. It was hard for people to recognize that it was happening. You know the whole what does that mean? It's not happening. It's happening, but it's rare, and then it's happening and it's good.
Yeah.
Um, the normal person, I don't think ever really thought this was good, but they didn't think it was happening at all. Or if they thought it was happening, it was very rare, and there must be a good reason for it, especially if the experts say it's okay, if they trust the experts. Well, things have shifted since then because they realize that sometimes experts get it wrong, and they're seeing with their own eyes that a lot of children are being convinced that they should be on hormones and get surgeries even as minors, and they didn't know that was happening.
Yeah, you mentioned the experts. Did you ever see the interview that Jon Stewart had with she was a politician out of like Alabama or something. Did you see that interview
I
where
didn't.
it's very interesting. Essentially, she's like, this is bad for transitioning kids. And he's like, so you're telling me, he started listing all of the medical journals and medical experts. He's like, all of these people that said that kids should transition because it saves their lives and everything. You're saying that they're all wrong. And she's like, well, yeah. And he's like, so Jon Stewart, who is like seen as very reasonable, is very much, and this was maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, he was very much on the side of like, we should be transitioning kids to help them be their authentic selves. And I just watched this and I go, there's no way that that's going to hold up in the future. And he just didn't see it. It's like how do we best approach this concept? Because the graphs are very clear. More and more young people are transitioning. And and how do we shift that trajectory and we make sure that if they are, they have some sort of mental disorder or rewiring of the brain. I mean, Buck Angel, said like, my brain is different. It's differently wired. This is the way I see myself. It's the way that it is. How do we deal with those people and how do we separate those people from the ones who are involved in like the social contagion element that Abigail Schreier talks about, this element of like people just transitioning because they can be viewed as a hero just by saying this, or people like Chloe Cole who are on the autistic spectrum and they're just like, you know what, like I don't feel like I fit in, what 14-year-old girl feels like they fit in with anything. Okay. I don't feel like I fit in, so I'm going to transition. How do we separate almost like the real trans people from the not?
Yeah, so part of my evolution, I think we see it differently. I used to believe exactly what you're saying
Okay.
right now. I've actually changed after knowing so many people who are trans or knowing people watching them in real time detransition. I don't think there's much of a difference now
Mm.
between what you are saying are maybe true trans and someone who detransitions. I think it's just a matter of a decision that they're making for their life. I don't think there's really a difference in terms of the way their brain is wired or something like that. There's
Huh.
no science behind that. So, Buck Angel has been very open about having trauma in Buck's life in the
Yeah.
past, lived on the streets, had substance abuse issues, was in the model industry. There was some trauma. And so I don't think Buck was like born with like a male brain. I think that stuff happened to Buck and this is more comfortable for Buck. And so now this is a decision. And Buck has also been very open and honest about some ambivalence about the decision, about struggling with it day to day. And on one hand, you'll hear Buck say, I this is great. This saved my life. And then you'll hear other moments where Buck will admit and say, actually, I still have to wake up every day and recognize that like I don't have the right parts, and not really a man. And so I don't think there's any biology behind it. There certainly isn't any proof. So I don't separating it is there isn't really a separation because I've met people. I think the person who really woke me up to this was a woman who goes by the name Matt Ray, and Matt Ray now would call herself a detransitioner. She tried to change her name. I'm saying she because she recognizes that she's a she. She tried to change her name back to the name her parents gave her, which was Amy, and she's doing a documentary on her life. But it was too uncomfortable. She's going by the name Matt. She kind of had a breakdown when she tried to go by the name Amy. She has a documentary called, I think, Finding Amy. I think that's what it's called. That's not out yet, but it's coming. But Amy and Matt, I know her as both. I met her as Matt, like as the true trans. I actually thought Matt was one of the happy ones, one of the like, stable, good ones. Everyone's good, but you know what I mean? Someone who's doing well. And then about a year later, we hung out again, and Matt was having all kinds of issues, both physically and emotionally. And Matt has maybe one of the most horrific stories in terms of the suffering from the hormones, and then recognizing that for 10 plus years, she'd been living an entire lie. I think and more since she was really young, right? So somebody you'd really think was the real deal. And now in her 30s, she has detransitioned. She's still kind of presents male looking, but because she just says I can't go back, and also this is sort of how she's comfortable, but she knows she's a woman and she regrets it, and she's really passionate about just helping people recognize how dangerous hormones and surgeries are for people, and is going to live the rest of her life with really serious problems. And yeah, so everyone has these problems. It's just a matter of how much they'll admit and share with the public,
Yeah.
and how much you are willing to sacrifice, I guess.
Yeah, the trauma element of this can't be ignored. You know, I love the book Chasing the Scream about by Johan Hari about drug addiction. Said the connection between extreme childhood trauma and drug addiction is a greater correlation than obesity and type 2 diabetes. Like if you do something like you watch your mom get raped or something horrific, like the chances that you end up as an addict in some way or another is almost guaranteed. So that's something that you've seen working with a lot of trans people, that there is this element of trauma, but
There's
there is a
always
biological
trauma.
element to some degree, right? Like
How?
I have a friend who she identifies as like pansexual, and and uh and she's like a believer, she's Christian and everything like that. But she's like, you know, I just don't feel like a normal girl. And I asked her, I was like, have you ever gotten a testosterone test? And she goes, no, but bro, it's probably through the roof. Like there are masculine women and there are feminine men. And those always
Yes.
just used to be like something that we accepted. There were feminine men and masculine women. And that didn't change the fact that they were men and women. But there is that biological element that we can recognize. So is that part of it as well? Maybe if you have more testosterone, and then from that you add the trauma in, then maybe that's almost like a perfect storm to get you to kind of lean towards this. And then you add on the acceptability in society to it, and you can be recognized as a hero, and you can be recognized as being your authentic true self, and people are very driven to accept people for their truth. Is it like all of that kind of a perfect storm leading to this hockey stick of more and more transitioning? What do you think the root cause is of so many people, especially young people, transitioning today compared to just, I mean, not that long ago, 10 years ago?
Well, I have two answers to that. There are so many individual situations that would lead them to gravitate towards this. Like you just said, one of the main reasons, especially those who have more pervasive, the ones that I would say you would call true trans, every single one of them, I've never met one that doesn't have some real trauma or some early attachment loss, like they were adopted or they were a surrogacy baby, something like that, like some like sever of attachment when they were young. So that would be a major, I don't know if you call it cause, or I'd say factor. And then the reason the Gays Against Groomer group is so widespread and effective is because it's a lot of gays and lesbian people, or those who tend to be more masculine or feminine, the tomboys and the more like effeminate males. they they're told, because they don't act like a traditional man or woman, that they must be trans,
Yeah.
and that message is being sent out much more now. So I think that's why that's more pervasive nowadays. But I'd say overall, in terms of culture and society, I think it's a symptom of people being lost and empty. There's a void, and they're looking for something. And so, from a real, philosophical perspective, I think this is people searching for belonging, searching for identity that will fill an emptiness inside of them. Um, Kids who are don't fit in, like you mentioned earlier, Chloe Cole,
Mm-hmm.
that was a one piece of it for her. She didn't feel, she was struggling with a lot of things within her family and personally, and this was an answer to that. And then she was given false promises. So our medical system, our institutions are all captured, and a lot of professionals are also telling young people who are feeling lost that this is an answer to their problems, an answer to their pain. And so, there are so many different factors that are adding to this. And then we have all the influences, of course, the internet. And, someone like Buck Angel didn't have the internet. So, Buck will say it wasn't that for me. But now the kids, you talk to any detransitioner now, every single one of them will say, I learned about it or it was reinforced by the
Yeah.
internet. Especially even younger ones. I mean, sorry, older ones, a lot of them around 2015 or so is when they got influenced. So now they're like in their late 20s or early 30s. A lot of them said it was YouTube that they found it, or a certain like obscure TV show that they found, or there were some news shows like Dateline, I think it was, that had something in 2012 with Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy talking about trans kids. So that these influences were already being fed back then, and now it's so widespread, right? You look anywhere, our culture is shifting, so I don't think it's calming down a little bit, but it's in our schools. It's in, you go to the coffee shop and there's the flag there. How many transgender awareness days? I don't even know. I'm not even aware of them all. In addition to an entire month of June, Pride, gay Pride has been taken over as trans Pride, or multiple gender Pride, I guess. So there are so many influences, and I think we as adults forget that kids, this is all they know, that this is their consciousness and it's everywhere, and there's a lot of peer influence. So yeah.
Yeah, I had Calvin Lunt on the podcast, and he said that it was his internalized homophobia, which is something that Dr. Deborah So talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Is like it's a way to not be gay if you transition. Like
Exactly.
empathy can be a beautiful thing, but it is a double-edged sword. And I think that it's like we all have empathy. I mean, you're a social worker. I'm a school teacher. Like I've had trans students, and like you pour into them because they're obviously struggling through things. But it's so interesting how it can be seen two ways. Is it life-saving, gender-affirming care, or life-saving, gender-affirming harm? Like
Mm-hmm.
we both see it as we're trying to save kids. And that's where
Yes.
that's why it's so emotionally charged. And that's where there's this big disconnect. But there's a difference when it comes to the trans issue. I think a lot of times about like anorexia nervosa is like, if a young person has anorexia and they're 80 pounds and they look in the mirror and they see that they're fat, because, and again, that's typically because of some sort of trauma, some sort of like trying to get control over your life. We don't say, okay, well, then you should get a lap band surgery. Like we
Mm-hmm.
don't go there, but we do go there with trans. Like, where do you think the disconnect is? Why do we not approach anorexia in the same way that we approach trans? Like, what is that difference for you?
Well, for me or for the people who
For
see it
your
differently.
like professional kind of analysis of why society sees that so
Oh, okay.
differently. If I would say that my 16-year-old daughter, sorry, excuse me, my 16-year-old daughter has anorexia and she sees herself as fat, even though she isn't technically fat, but that's the way she wants to. She really feels like she would be better if she was skinnier and be her true authentic self, even though that could cause harm. Like we would never say, okay, yes, you should get the lap band surgery. We don't do that, but we do that with like getting a double mastectomy or getting on these hormones, these irreversible, which they are, puberty blockers and things like that. Like, why is it not the same for other ailments like that?
Yeah, the reason for that is the worldview of it, the perspective, the belief system. So kind of what you were saying earlier, I'm not sure what your belief system is, but most people who believe in transgender believe that there are some people who are trapped in the wrong body, and um, they believe that that person's distress, their symptoms, whether that be cutting, severe body harm, even eating disorders. Because I was just looking at an eating disorder clinic who affirms transgender identities while they're an eating disorder clinic. So it's a paradox right there. Because they believe if they affirm the trans identity, that all of their distress, all of their other symptoms will dissipate. That they need to do that first as a safety measure because affirmative care saves lives. For those who are just listening audio, I'm doing quotes because I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe that. And there is no proof of that. None of the studies that they cite actually prove that either. So there's no science behind that either. And so that's the reason. So when we use that analogy, it falls flat on the true believers because they believe that, well, it's not the same thing, apples and oranges, because someone who's anorexic is sick and that they need to be fed to get better. But they don't think being trans is any kind of like problem or illness or reaction to something. like they don't see it as a maladaptive reaction to something else, which is the way I view it. So like we were just saying, somebody who's autistic, somebody who's struggling, somebody who has trauma, somebody who is very uncomfortable in their body, I see that as some kind of stress reaction to something, right?
Yeah.
But they don't see it that way. They see it as like a inborn, inherent characteristic, kind of like the color of my hair, or being short or tall. Like that, being trans is just another one of those characteristics, and we need to give them all of these hormones and surgeries to get them to match up with the way they were born. Again, in quotes.
Yeah, and the bias exists in the universities that are doing these studies, and these, and the universities that are promoting this, their bias is there, and that's going to lead the culture as well. Like John Haidt says something great. He says if there was a study that said caffeine causes breast cancer, then a man who doesn't drink coffee would go, yeah, sounds good, like in the peer review. But if it's a female coffee drinker, they'll go, wait a second, let me go through this. I got to poke holes in this thing, which is what peer review is supposed to do. They're supposed to poke holes in it. Like the scientific method is you have a hypothesis, you try to prove it wrong. There's so many ways you can find confirmation bias, but because people are kind of programmed into this way of thinking, they're going to let this stuff go. I had Colin Wright on the podcast before, and he talks about how, people are just like, who are kind of reviewing these studies, people in PhD programs and things, they're just like so into this ideology that they don't scrutinize it because it affirms their worldview. And then the studies go out there and they get into medical journals, and then all the experts are saying that this is what it is. And we have Neil deGrasse Tyson, the science guy, who's talking about how gender is on a spectrum, and it's just kind of taken over everything. I mean, it's a really interesting thing because we have trouble viewing things objectively. We just do as humans. We have our leanings, we have our ideologies, we have our viewpoints, we have our worldviews, and those are going to guide us. But part of critical thinking, which is like my jam, is best you can to view things as objectively as possible. Like, I'm a believer. I love Jesus, but like, I teach apologetics, and the thing that I love is having hard conversations where people challenge my worldview so that I can better articulate what I believe to be true. So I think that people just aren't built that way. I like being proven wrong because it gets me closer to being right, but I understand that that's how my brain works, and that makes me kind of weird. But it's happening at the universities, and then it just kind of filters down, and there's this lean towards empathy and acknowledging people for their true selves, and you are who you say you are. And it's kind of just, it seems like it's just kind of gone off the rails, but that doesn't mean that these people don't deserve dignity and respect and giving grace and kindness. And that's something that I really want to lean into, where I don't like the way that a lot of Christian conservatives, the people who are talking about this transgender issue, Matt Walsh and others, I don't like the way that they do it. You can't say out of one side of your mouth, you have a mental disorder, and then the other side of your mouth, you're a disgusting human being and a deep fake human being, and no one likes you or respects you. Like, that's horrific. Can you imagine doing that with any other mental disorder? Like, that sounds really, really gross. And especially coming from someone who claims to be a Christian, because I don't think that's the way Jesus would do it. I think the way Jesus would do it would say, Dylan Mulvaney, come over to my house for lunch. Let's sit down. Let me hear about your story. What is your story? I'm sure Dylan Mulvaney has trauma in their background, and then you can love on them, Daryl Davis style, love on them, befriend them, form relationships with them, and then that tends to open their mind up to what's going on and shift them out of it. And I don't see enough of that. I think you have Pamela, I do think that you have a very, soft kind approach, probably because of your background, the kind of populations that you've been dealing with. I think we need more of that in this conversation. That's what I'm hoping to do with my podcast and bringing these people on and talking about that, is to not just dig our heels in and be like, you're terrible, you're fake, you're blah, 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 blah. I don't like that. I don't think it's the way forward.
Yeah, the reason I'm so passionate about this subject matter is because I see the trans people as people, they say protect trans kids, that they have that slogan. Well, I actually believe I'm protecting the trans kids by protecting
Right.
them from being told these lies that are going to lead them into terrible health conditions and lots of regret and loneliness and pain. My personal story is I actually have a lot of chronic pain. I'm doing better now, but I had a really serious condition where my nerves were being compressed, and I had serious chronic pain to the point where I was incapacitated for a couple of years. And I got surgery and I'm doing better, but I'm still not 100%. So I know what it's like to just not be able to physically live a full life. And I lost a lot of years from that. And I've seen that happen to the detransitioners. And it's not just the detransitioners, it's happening to the trans people too. Just because they've not decided that they're not trans anymore doesn't mean they're not still going through disabilities. So I see that. So I want to protect the trans kids, and it's not just kids. Honestly, I honestly believe adults are being harmed too, especially the young adults, because they've been sort of groomed to believe that they're trans when they're younger, and then yeah, once they turn 18, they don't magically snap out of it. So it, I have a lot of compassion for most of the trans people. I guess there are certain ones that seem to be more like predators or seem to be more opportunistic. And I have a little less compassion for them, but I usually just stay quiet because it's just not productive to combat them. Um, but my focus is on this vulnerable population, people with trauma. Like you said earlier, I work with kids in foster care, and I know how they're just so empty and they're looking for something to feel whole. And it's like, I know these kids. I knew them before they turned trans, before they were all convinced to be trans, because I was working in group homes back in like 2006, 2007, 2008. And there were zero trans kids then, but they're the same, and they're not the same physical kids, but they're the same, having the same issues. And I know what they're like, and I know how they get overattached, or they get distant, and they act out, or they test people, and they're naive and they believe things, and
Yeah.
I know what it's like. And so I feel a special place in my heart for these kids, and even the young adults that are going through this. And I want to protect them from what their fate is if they carry on with hormones and surgeries, 5+ years, they're guaranteed to have health issues. It's just a matter of what the health issues are and when. And even the people who are prominent and say they're supposedly happy trans people will be honest about the the struggles that they have. So
Yeah, and when you say you're happy, like there's something that happens, especially with biological females who transition, is you start getting testosterone, and one of the benefits of testosterone is increased mood. So when you start getting
exactly.
on testosterone, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. And that's like a chemical thing that you're on testosterone now. You feel good. And that's that jump that when they do first transition, they feel really good.
And
But
they
then
call
over
it
time,
euphoria.
yeah, but then over time that wears off. So like when people say, if I wouldn't have gotten this, I wouldn't feel this good. But you have to look more longitudinally. You have to look at the long term. And what happens is that starts to wear off. Chloe felt great for whatever, a year or so when she started to get on this stuff. And then it starts to wear off. And then, other realities start to pour in. And then you're like, oh, wait a second. I don't know if this is. But we're talking about people, unless you're 25 years old, your prefrontal cortex thinking about, the long term repercussions of your actions just isn't developed yet. So you could say you can transition at 18, go to war at 18, but it probably should be 25. I mean, just like biologically, but that's
Yeah.
not what's
Or
happening. So people are transitioning
yeah.
under the age of 25. They're not thinking about what is long term. You ask a 19-year-old about like kids and starting a family, they're not there yet. That's the
No.
population I've always taught, seniors in high school. Like they're not thinking that way. They're thinking in the moment and what's going to make them feel good in the moment, not thinking downstream, which is the way our brains are developed. And I think that's a real issue as well.
And even WPATH, the supposed experts that say this is the way, that they don't want to gatekeep, and they don't even have age limits anymore, thanks to Rachel Levine from Biden's administration. When the WPATH files came out just around this time last year, it was March of 2024. There is a video, I can give it to you if you want to post it after this, that shows the experts, quote unquote, the experts from WPATH admitting that these young people do not understand fertility. They cannot make these decisions. So even these people who know behind the scenes, they admit that. But when they're in public, they say, it's okay. They need this. It doesn't matter. This is important. Who cares if they can have kids or not? They'll die otherwise, right? It's all of this like death talk.
Yeah.
It's almost like a death cult if you think about it. No one can predict anyone's death. Like just that's also what woke me up, is the whole suicide talk thing, because I work with suicidal kids. I've worked in a high school where there were actually it's real. Like there were suicides. We had a suicide cluster at this high school I worked at. So I worked with a lot of people who are really were suicidal. And you never say to someone who either actively is or will be or could be that they will kill themselves if blank. You just don't do that. And so the fact that that's a slogan is wild. And then that's how we're working. So it was just against everything. So all these lies compounded. And there's this placebo effect, right? There's this belief system. If I don't get these hormones and surgeries, I will die. They're told that by everyone
Yeah.
around them. And so they believe it. You internalize that belief, right? So of course they when they get those things, they think, oh, well, this is going to help me. So you're going to keep believing it, especially if you keep getting those messages over and over again until you're usually years later it hits you that it didn't actually do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, and the New York Times. I mean, this isn't Breitbart. The New York Times ran an article on that to show that the data, and it was I guess it was like censored to some degree, but to show that there is actually no data to show that a transition will prevent you from suicidality. Like the data is just not there. But
Now, if you look at one of the studies, one of them has a sample size of 12 people. If you look at most of them will just say that the LGBTQ plus population has higher suicidality, and even the lawyer Chase, what was her name at the Supreme Court? No, I'm blank. Strangio, Chase
oh,
Strangio.
Chase Strangio, yeah.
Yeah, admitted in the Supreme Court that there aren't more completed suicides. It just increases suicidality. What does suicidality means? It means the person says they're suicidal, they're self-reporting. Well, why would someone self-report that? They might feel distressed, they probably do, but they're also being told and fed leading questions to
Of
report
course.
that. So, so you've got this group of people who are vulnerable for lots of reasons. The LGBTQ plus whatever population tends to be people who have more emotional distress for lots of different reasons. And so you take a population who has these comorbidities, and then you measure whether or not they have more mental health issues, and they will. But then they've never measured a group where now you affirm them versus in a group that you don't affirm them and then compare it. They've never done that. There's none of that. That doesn't exist. There's no control group in any of these studies. They just do a correlation. So, and then they scaremonger because especially families, that's how they've convinced a lot of these parents because they've got a kid who has maybe made a suicide attempt in the past or is really, acting out or struggling, is emotionally unstable. And then you've got a doctor that says, if you don't do this, they will kill themselves. Well, it's easy to fall for that when you have a kid that has done some of these behaviors. And that's how they've really, I think, handcuffed so many people to believe into these lies.
Yeah, of course. Like as a parent, like if you say there's two doors, one is your child's going to commit suicide. Door two, you're just like, I don't need to hear what's behind door two. Yeah, I'm taking door two. Like I'll just go to door
Like, what's the
two.
difference? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm taking door two, whatever it is, because I have friends whose children have taken their life. I have friends whose children are wrestling with that. I mean, these are the people that you love more than anything else on this planet, and you want to protect them. Biologically, you're programmed to, and just your heart. These are the most important beings in your life, so you will protect them any way you possibly can. So when the institution says you got to do this to save your child, I will do anything. I will walk across hot coals to save my child. I will do anything to do that. It's very manipulative, and that seems to be what's going on.
Blackmail. And so that's why I think I was able to see through it more easily because I was on disability for so many years while they were, I guess, feeding people that lie or, tricking people, I think, manipulating people to believe in that. I wonder if I would have believed in it if I were there where it was sort of like a slow boil. But I was gone during those years where they were teaching all the professionals this idea. And then I came back and I was just had so much experience working with mentally ill population, especially young people and teenagers, that I was like, that's not how you do it. You'd never do that. Wait,
Right.
what's going on here? And I just thought this was wild. And so it was easy for me to see through it. But it's, yeah, you just don't do that. If you have a suicidal population or even a non-suicidal population, if you have any population, you don't talk about suicide. You don't do that. It's actually dangerous
Of
to
course.
keep talking about suicide, especially with vulnerable kids. It's a dangerous prospect. So the fact I think the nefarious leaders in this know that. I think they know that convincing all these professionals and adults and parents to say if you don't do this you'll kill themselves, or just thinking about suicide so much as an option, reinforcing that. I mean, when I was growing up, people didn't talk about suicide all the time. People now will say, oh, well, it was stigmatized, so we didn't talk about it. Well, it's good because you shouldn't talk about it so much. Talking about it reinforces these ideas. And people who are experts in suicide prevention know that.
Yeah. So I think what we have to do is we have to be able to talk about this stuff. We have to have these conversations. That's why I have them all the time, and get people to kind of just wrestle with the fact that you might be wrong. You might be wrong, Pamela. I might be wrong. So let's have conversations about this and like look at the data and look at some common sense. Try different metaphors and try whatever tools we can to try and sort this out so that we can move forward. You have a children's book coming out,
Yeah.
Froggy Girl. And you said it just came in, and just want to share a little bit of that. Because it's taking the idea of transitioning, especially among children, and just like putting it, because that's so emotionally charged. So we have to like separate the idea of being trans from it, and you put it in this other realm, that's what I was talking about with like anorexia, is because it's so triggering. Jordan Peterson talking about compelled speech. Take the trans issue out and let's just talk about compelled speech. I use the metaphor of like an umbrella. I'm like, if the government said you have to call it an umbrella, you can't call it a rain shield, then that would be wrong. Someone goes, no one ever calls it a rain shield. Well, that's so stupid. That's not the point. The point is you can't force me to say things. This goes back to like a 1947 Supreme Court case with Jehovah's Witnesses. You have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, no, you can't force my tongue. That's something that's just not, in the history of English common law, even though in the UK they're locking people up for misgendering people. In Canada, they've done that. But this idea, we have to maybe separate a little bit from the trans issue and look at it in this way that's a little bit less triggering to understand the principles behind it. So did you want to share that book with us?
Yeah, so it's just before we logged on to record this podcast, I got this like proof copy from my publisher, and I just opened the box right before we logged in.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read it to you guys and to your audience. Your audience are going to be the first people to hear it. It's a little rhyming book for children, and it doesn't mention trans at all, but you'll see the themes as I read it. So it's called Froggy Girl. I don't know. You got visual? Is this going to be on YouTube?
Yeah.
So so you can see this is the front cover. All right. So let me read it. There once was a girl who said she was a frog and had a chicken, cow, cat, or dog. She knew how to hop, so it had to be true. Being a frog seemed right. What else could she do? Her parents even gave her frog feet, which she thought were neat. Her teacher gave her a special flag, and the girl was so glad. Her friends thought it was strange, but they wanted to be nice, even if it meant there would be a price. She tried to make frog sounds, but that was hard. She went swimming with the other frogs and didn't get far. The girl began to doubt, but all agreed she was a frog, so she couldn't back out. She's sad now. She felt sad and alone because she couldn't catch a fly. That's when she realized she was living a lie. In a state of confusion, she went for a walk, wishing for a friend with whom she could talk. She's in the forest now. There's a little turtle in the picture for those who are just listening. When she reached the river, she met a wise turtle with a great bumpy shell. He said, "You can't be a frog, no matter how many people you tell." Here's the froggy. The turtle.
Turtle.
The turtle. And she's wearing a froggy outfit, of course. He reminded her that it's wonderful to be a girl. She can sing and dance and even do a twirl. The little girl learned to love the way God made her, beautiful and smart and full of fervor. The end.
Yeah, I think that's really cute.
The artist is a detransitioner, is a man who used to believe he was a woman and took hormones and has suffered some. He drew little pictures of us. His name
that's
is
cool.
Nicholas Blooms. We were at the AAP conference together talking to doctors about the harms of hormones and surgeries last year.
Yeah. So. So I think that the way
idea,
kind of forward,
right?
huh?
You get the idea.
For sure, of course. Yeah, and I think that the place that I want to find kind of common ground with this, because people are very triggered by this, especially maybe people who are in that community. Just two things that I will like put out there to the more like on the side, whether they're allies or they're in the transgender community. Two things. One is we can agree that detransitioning should be avoided at all costs. Like, we don't want detransitioners. That if you're not trans, to the trans community out there, if you're not trans, you should not transition. Okay. So we should avoid whatever is happening with a lot more detransitioners, and more are going to come. I truly believe that. More are going to come. We should try to avoid that at all costs. That's one thing. The second thing is recognize that the people that think differently than you, it's not that they're uncaring. It's not that they're unempathetic. They just view it differently. They see what you might see as care, they see as harm. And what you see as harm, they see as care. Like if you can recognize that, then maybe you can round your edges a little bit, not just instantly go into these are bad people or these are evil people, but instead these are people that view this very differently. And the more you can lean into curiosity, the more that you can form fellowship and ask real questions. And both sides need to have a lot of grace with one another, extending courteous goodwill, even if you don't think they deserve it, extending courteous goodwill to have these conversations. Recognize that people like Pamela, who have really dedicated their professional life to this, are not your enemy. They see things differently than you, and to interact with them and to share your information and share your stories, I think the more that we do that, the more we can move forward. But please don't view people that see this differently. And this, again, goes to both sides. Do not view the people that see this differently as just bad people. I don't think that's the way forward. I think we have to see them as people who are differently moral, who see this thing differently. And so all we have to do is try to understand one another. Why do you think I think what I think? Why do you think I see things so differently? Like, what is it about that? And the more we can lean into that curiosity, the more that we can lean into more respectful civil discourse, I think the more that we're going to be able to come out of this ahead without causing some really serious damage to young people moving forward. That is going to be really a problem for a lot of people, because if these are people with trauma in their background, these are people who are on the autistic spectrum, to add irreversible biological harm to them is just going to make things worse. So that's kind of like my call to people out there. But what would be like your call? Like what is your kind of agenda and goal with this? And where do you want to take this as a society, Pamela?
Well, I really like that message. I think that's a really good message to recognize that, yeah, on both sides. I do think most people who are on my side recognize I mean, there are people who get paid for clicks to, demonize others. But I think the everyday person who's not paid for clicks recognize that those, especially kids, trans kids, are not bad and not just doing it just to, for some negative reason or, some nefarious reason. I believe that they've been lied to and they've been sold a lie, and they're people who are hurting. And that's how I see it. I don't want to look at you or anybody as like you need to be rescued or anything like that. I just hope that people see that someone like me who has stuck my neck out and other professionals who've stuck their necks out have sacrificed a lot to help you have less harm in your life, and
Yeah.
like to that there is another side to this, and that it might feel good right now in the moment. Usually it does. But a few years down the line, there's going to be some suffering. And a lot of that is hidden from you. And there are people who make a lot of money from your you taking hormones and surgeries, and there are bad people out there that I think are taking advantage of young people who are looking for happiness and belonging and to feel some kind of wholeness that they haven't found yet, which is one, just normal for being young, and then compounded with maybe other things that you might be struggling with. So I just care about kids that I've known intimately through being a social worker for so many years, that I know it's not as easy for them to be social in situations. It's not as easy for them to make friendships and to feel comfortable in their own skin, and that takes time. And I feel like that those feelings are being taken they're taking and been taking it they're being taken advantage of. And I really hope that you recognize that someone like me or other people, even those that might be more harsh, they might have the best delivery, but they care. We care.
Yeah.
So that's what this is about.
Yeah, we're empathetic truly to the plight of what it must be like to go through, life in your skin type of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that that's really important. So, thank you so much, Pamela. This was great. Where can people keep up with your work and
So I
everything
have
that you're
I
doing?
have a website that I should update, but it's thetruthfultherapist.org. My Froggy Girl book will be available on www.froggygirlbook.com. That will be released. We're recording this now in March, and it should be released sometime in the spring, I think May, but I
Okay.
don't have an exact date yet. I'm on Instagram. That's how you and I have connected, which is the.truthfultherapist. I'm on Twitter or X as Truth Therapist. And I have a Substack, which I write articles, and that's Pam, the Truthful Therapist. I'm on YouTube, which is really more just my Instagram and other things just on there. I don't do regular shows on there or anything, but that's also the Truthful Therapist.
Okay, and I'll
Those are
put
some
those in the
places you
show
can find me.
notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pamela, thank you so much for coming here. Kind of taking the approach that you do, putting your neck out there. You get a lot of arrows thrown at you, but you can't argue with the fact that you've dedicated your life to helping, at-risk youth. And this is just more along that thread. So if
Exactly.
someone has a history of like helping people who have all of these different things, and then they focus on this one, it's like, did you just all of a sudden change? You care about at-risk kids, you care about at-risk, now all of a sudden you hate at-risk kids. It doesn't fit the model of what you've dedicated your life to. And I just want to give people pause and just get them to I'm just trying to, like Socrates said, I can't teach anybody anything. I can only get them to think. And that's really what this podcast is all about. And if you have a different perspective, as I said, I've had a lot of trans people who disagree, and that's important too. So it's all different, all about different perspectives. But I appreciate you coming on here. I think the book's really cute, and I think it's like something that we can just start sparking thought a little bit in young people to be like, yeah, just because you think that you might be something, maybe that's not necessarily true. And helping kids to ground their understanding of reality and truth, I think, is something that's going to serve them better in the long term, even if in the short term it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.